participants in our 39th webinar today. A very special welcome to our speaker today, Mrs. Anuradha Chaudhary, who's going to talk to us on integral well-being and Indic perspective. Before we introduce our speaker today, let me share a little bit about Ritambra Wellness. We are a collective of like-minded individuals from various walks of life who've come together on this mission of achieving human wellness and well-being through a holistic approach. An approach that believes that well-being is not just about the body, but the mind as well, and our solutions lie in the practice of knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage. At Ritambra, we also place great emphasis on arts and culture, music and dance especially, since we believe there's a direct link to this practice and our inner higher selves. With this intent of holistic well-being, we conduct virtual and live corporate programs and group retreats for wellness that empower oneself through self-discovery and personal transformation for unlocking one's true potential. Please visit our website, ritambrawellness.com, for more details. And all our earlier webinars are uploaded on YouTube under the same name. And if you resonate with what we are doing and would like to be part of our community, we are posting the details of where you can connect with us on the chat. Alternately, if you find it easier, please post your contact details, cell number, email ID on the chat function, and we can add you to our groups. Now, back to today's program. May I request everyone to stay muted through the talk? Today's session will be for 60 minutes. Mrs. Anuradha will talk to us for about 40-45 minutes, after which there'll be a Q&A session for 15 minutes. And please feel free to post your questions using the chat function, and we'll take up the questions immediately after the talk. Let's introduce our speaker now. May I ask Shri Premji, our Director, IT and Media, to introduce Mrs. Anuradha. Over to you, Premji.
Thank you, Binaji, and I have great pleasure in introducing Anuradha today. Anuradha is presently a faculty of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Kharagpur and a member of the Reiki Center of Excellence for the Science of Happiness. She teaches Sanskrit and heritage, Indian psychology, French, and history of science and technology in ancient India. After graduating from the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, she went on to get her PhD in Sanskrit on Vedic psychology from Pondicherry University and was awarded the Erasmus Mundus Scholarship of the EU for an MLit in Crossways in European Humanities. She also received a UN-related scholarship for a course on human rights at the Summer University of Human Rights, Geneva. She worked on the Indian concepts of happiness as a fellow at the Development Foundation, Bangalore, and established the Center for Indian Psychology in Jain University, Bangalore, which sought to establish an alternative paradigm for psychology based on the Indic worldview. She is also an online instructor for yogaanytime.com and NPTEL as a resource person for teaching spoken Sanskrit, yoga, psychology, and about the transformative power of mantras. Besides this, she has done sessions for Auroville International, Netherlands, and School of Practical Philosophy and Economic Sciences in UK, Ireland, Australia, Ojai Yoga Crib, USA, Theosophical Society, Ojai Bivali, and European Union of Yoga, Zinal, where along with Dr. Vinay Chandra, she was invited as a guest of honor. Together they teach at several other academic institutions and other organizations across the globe. Furthermore, they have founded the Ritambra Yogashala, co-edited a book titled Perspectives on Indian Psychology, and co-authored another titled Happiness, Indian Perspectives. Last year, she received the Excellent Young Teachers Award at IIT Kharagpur. Recently, she organized her first ever 41-day Global Festival of Yoga. This was celebrating wellness for Indica Yoga starting from 21st June 2020. It had around 124 yoga teachers, practitioners, researchers, and extra worldwide, reaching out to over 50 countries. I have great pleasure in welcoming Anuradha to this program.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank Ritambara Wellness for this opportunity, and to Binaji, Premji, Krishnapani and all for giving me this chance to share a few insights, a few thoughts on integral well-being, Indic perspectives. So when we think of wellness, people have already been, you've been discussing this for a long time, and we all always have ideas about what wellness really is. And while there are certain general definitions of wellness, each one of us also customizes these terms for ourselves and applies them in our own lives. So it becomes very important to understand what does wellness mean for each individual on one side, but on the other side, when we are referring to these terms, it also becomes very critical to try and understand what these terms mean in themselves. And when I'm talking about Indian perspectives, to see whether there is something new that is being offered by the Indic tradition versus the mainstream discourse on these topics. So with these few words, introductory words, I would like to start my presentation that I have here. So that's the opening slide, and then we move on. So as we see here, the first one, that perspectives matter. And why do perspectives matter? Because everything that we do is, at the end of the day, is undertaken based on a certain way of understanding the world around us. So depending on the particular filter or lens we are using, we will respond or react to the world around us and to the world inside of us. And therefore, perspectives play an important role. And in that context, since you have an understanding of what the mainstream discourses on wellness are, I will be trying to bring forth, like I mentioned, certain salient features of the Indic concepts of well-being, and especially from an integral perspective. So let's just look at the etymology of the terms integral, well-being, and health, because they are deeply interrelated. And also because I have a background in languages, and especially knowing Sanskrit, it's always fascinating to delve deeper into the psychology that the words themselves reveal to us. Very often we don't engage in that quest of the word and the truth they harbor. When they were created, they evolved from a certain understanding or a certain requirement. But then we get carried away by the superficial meanings, associated meanings that are attributed to them. And sometimes we lose connection with the original sense that was given to these words. So I thought it would be an interesting exercise to just try and look at what these words have to offer to us. So the word integral. So integral, it means of or pertaining to the whole, intrinsic, belonging as a part to a whole. So normally when we think of integral, we tend to think that it's one whole thing. But as we can see that here, there is also this connotation of that it is a belonging to a part of a whole. And from the Middle French intégral of the 14th century, from medieval Latin integralis, forming a whole. And that's the meaning that is more often understood. So again, integer, whole, and related integrally. And as a noun in the 1610s, became an adjective. Let's look at the word well-being. But the word being comes from the root to be, and therefore that's a word that we will not enter into in greater detail. But the word well, so well in a satisfactory manner, this is as an adjective. It comes from the Old English well, abundantly, very, very much, indeed, to be sure, with good reason, nearly, for the most part. From the Proto-Germanic source, it means well, to wish, to will. And also we see that the source also from Sanskrit, prativaram, at will. So it means it has a sense of getting better, etc. And also in the Old English, as an interjection, as an expression of surprise, and in Old English in the sense of good fortune, happy, from the adverb sense of satisfactory, etc. The word health, so it comes from help, I guess, and it means wholeness, a whole being, a sound or well. And also from the PIE is the Proto-Indo-European, which is said to precede the Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. So it's said to be the common language that precedes Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, from which these three languages are supposed to have emerged as the first primary derivatives. So there it means whole, uninjured, of good omen, healthy, holy, sacred. So some very interesting connotations that are coming up when you're going to the etymology of the term. In another dimension, it also means in Middle English of physical health, it also means prosperity, happiness, welfare, preservation, safety. And as an abstract noun, to whole, not to heal, it meaning a salutation or it's wishing welfare. Okay, and then the concept of health food is from 1848, but that's a secondary part of it. But important to hold these different connotations of the term as we look at the Indic understanding of integral well-being. So one of the terms that seems to fulfill a lot of the adjectives that were used in all these terms is the concept of sukha. But before I go into sukha, I would just like to take up the term integral once more. And there were two ideas that were important. One is that it is integral within itself. So there is a concept of a whole. But the other one is also that it is part of something else. Okay, so this idea of being part of is again a salient characteristic of the Indian tradition, that everything is a part of a larger whole. And within that, each part is also a whole in itself. So there is that yad pinde tad brahmande, or yad brahmande tadeva pinde. So whatever is there in the macrocosm is there exactly in the same measure and the same means in the microcosm. And whatever is possible in the microcosm is possible for the macrocosm. So this mapping of the macrocosm and the microcosm is very important. And it's in this context that the term sukha becomes quite fascinating to explore in greater depth. I will first just talk a little more about, maybe if you want to share some ideas about sukha, so if you'd like to just share on chat, what is your understanding of sukha? So if you'd like to just share some thoughts on chat, anybody? What is your general attribution? What do you understand by the term sukha? Anybody? Happiness, yes. Arunaji is there. Nice. Contentment. All right. Yes, Vinaji. So happiness, contentment, holistic happiness, yes. Peaceful, yes. Thank you. Ease. Raiji is also there. Wonderful. Okay. And family, okay. Well-being, okay. So there's an associated notion of sukha being a collective well-being. Pleasure, all right. Very interesting. Yeah. Yes. And so very interesting, the term happiness, if you go to the root of it, it comes from the root hap, which means to feel fortunate. So happiness, normally we tend to associate it happy when I have this, when I have that. But the term in its source means to feel grateful. So if one is grateful, one can never be unhappy. So that's an interesting dimension of that term in itself. Okay, let's move on. So just understanding the importance of sukha that was given, that it was attributed in this tradition. So we have this famous Shanti mantra, which is Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So when we say Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, may everybody be happy. That word happy will be unraveled in greater detail down the line. So next, Sarve Santu Niramayaha. So happiness we can associate it with a psychological state of being. Sarve Santu Niramayaha. Let everybody be without disease. So we're talking of a physical well-being in that context. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. May everybody see the good. So now we're talking of the individual in relationship with society. So let everybody see the good around them. And finally, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. This is a more universal concept of well-being. When you're saying Ma Kaschid, it means let none. which also includes the non-anthropocentric world as well. It's not just the human beings who have wellness and non-wellness, but it also includes the creatures, the plants, everything that is around us. Nothing should have dukkha. Now, this particular verse has a very interesting other dimension which can be understood when one understands the fact that this is not just a prayer of well-being, but this is also a certain responsibility embedded in it. So when you're saying may everybody be happy, there is a responsibility there, because the Indic civilization was not so much about claiming of things. It was at the same time always asking itself the question, what can I do to become an active contributor in generating what I am wishing for the world around me. So when it is saying sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, the most important thing was, how do I practice happiness as a responsibility? When I'm saying let everybody be well, let everybody be disease free, it was most important to understand, how do I ensure physical well-being for myself? When I'm saying let everybody see the good, this was in fact the key that allowed me to understand this responsibility dimension of this verse. Because when I'm saying let everybody see the good, it became most important for everybody to practice the good. Because unless every individual is practicing the good, there was no way that everybody could see the good. And this has other dimensions to it as well. For example, if I am practicing the good, the term bhadra is actually a little deeper than good. Bhadra means that which is cultivated, that which is cultured, that which is refined. So if I am practicing those things, the neuroscience tells us that somebody who's observing an individual is actually reenacting identically the same things in their brain. And that is the whole concept of mirror neurons. So this was a discovery by Dr. V.S. Ramachandran. And he talks of mirror neurons, where he says that whatever we see is something that we are replicating in our brain as if we are undertaking that action ourselves. So when we are saying sarve bhadrani pashyantu, which implies that each individual has to practice the good, it would imply that just by the mere fact of practicing the good or wellness, and in every sense of the term for oneself, one was already facilitating the replication of that in the minds of everybody who is watching us. So with one person's actions, one was facilitating that experience in the minds of all the observers. And finally, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavit, let nobody have any sorrow. This would only be true again if every individual was taking the onus of not becoming the source of sorrow for anybody around them. So a very important aspect of this mantra can emerges when one looks at it not from just a mere prayer, but also from a sense of a responsibility. So how do we practice integral well-being, as we can see in this context? That would also enable the world around us to reflect it just by the mere fact of us doing that in our own lives. Astu. And yeah, so this was important. And also I was saying that in today's context with the corona, these lines become more true than ever before. So sarve santu niramaya, let everybody be without disease. And this can only be possible if every individual ensured that they are taking all the precautions to have well-being in their lives. This is another one which talks of loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, let all the worlds have sukha in them. So this is again another aspect of the Indic worldview, where it looks at the world as a multi-dimensional reality. So the world is simultaneously coexisting at various levels, and each level is a reflection of all the other levels. And therefore, acting on one level would have its repercussions and impact on all the other levels subsequently. And therefore, the need to act in an integral manner. So the whole notion of integrality becomes extremely crucial, because then we are talking of rectifying or bringing in proper sukha experiences on one level, and it will have its rippling effects to ensure that the worlds within and the worlds without, because we saw that relationship of the microcosm and the macrocosm. So if the microcosm is ensuring integral well-being, it creates its own ripples in the world around it to start experiencing degrees of well-being in itself. So what are some sources of sukha according to the Indic tradition? So this is one verse which says sukhasya, which says sukhasya moolam dharmaha, dharmasya moolam arthaha, arthasya moolam rajyam, rajyasya moolam indriya jayaha, indriya jayasya, there's a mistake there, moolam vinayaha. Okay, so sukhasya moolam dharmaha, the source of sukha is dharma. And we will see this connection occurring ever so often, and we'll try and also understand what we mean by that. So dharmasya moolam artha, what is the source of dharma? Is to have sufficient wealth. So well-being also comprises of having enough. But what that wealth means is again a question. It can be material wealth, but it can also imply the concept, the experience of being wealthy as well. So it's not exclusive of, that wealth that you have, the artha that you have, is normally the material wealth, but it can also reflect itself at different dimensions of our being. Arthasya moolam rajyam. So we see that to have wealth and well-being in a society, the governance system has to be conscious of this aspect. Rajyasya moolam indriya jayaha. So what is the source of a good governance? Indriya jaya, the control of one's senses. Because if the senses are not controlled, then we are not going to have good governance. As we can see in our Kali Yuga special around us, that the source of a lot of disruptive governance, despite existing policies, is because of, disproportionate amount of greed and requirements. There's somebody who's annotating also on the PPT, which is quite interesting. And then we have Indriya Jayasya Moolam Vinayaha. So how do we have Indriya Jaya? There's humility. So understanding and accepting what is with us is sufficient, not to want to grab things that are not there with us. So interesting connections there. Another source of this sukha is knowledge. So it says Vidya dadati vinayam, knowledge gives us humility. Vinaya dhyati patratam, with humility comes patronage. Patratva dhanam apnoti, with patronage comes wealth. Dhana dharma, from wealth comes the practice of the right things, and from there sukha. So I'd like you to see the connection of all these different words that are popping up. So there is knowledge, there is the importance of humility, there's the importance of dharma, there's an importance of artha, so sufficient material resources, the need to use them properly with dharma. Dharma comes from the right vinaya. How would you get vinaya? By having the right knowledge. So there's an entire interconnectivity of things, and if any of this is missing, then we will be taking out important ingredients for contributing towards our integral well-being. And then another shloka here which says, alasasya kuto vidya, avidyasya kuto dhanam, adhanasya kuto mitram, amitrasya kutah sukham. So he says that how do you start getting any of this? So a lazy person cannot acquire knowledge. So we come to knowledge as a basis. If you are not ready to put in the effort, so that initial effort is a primary start, it's a beginning in order to get your vidya. And then if you don't have the vidya, you will not get the dhanam down the line. If there is no dhanam, then mitram. So friendships are also associated with how well you're doing in life often. But that's not the only criteria, but that wellness. So if you're doing well in life, it also can lead. So when I'm saying also, there is a recognition that it's not an absolute quality in itself. Just because you're wealthy is no reason why you're going to be a sukha. You're going to have sukha, or you're going to have friends, or real friends in that sense. And amitrasya kuta sukham. So if you are alone, if you're lonely, then it's not evident for the ordinary population to experience sukha. when I'm saying all these, you would notice I'm putting in caveats because these are not absolutes in themselves. So we do know that people who can be completely content in themselves and by themselves are also people who are deeply happy. So while it is friends and all that is important, but where does true happiness really lie is a question. And from the true happiness, the sense of well-being, the sense of abundance that we saw that the term well reflects, the sense of being fortunate, all of that, and integral. So feeling it complete in oneself and connecting it with the world around oneself. So let's move on to the etymology of sukha. Sukham comes from the root su, which is excellent or pleasing, and kha means the senses. So when Krishna Panditji said, sukha is pleasurable, that's the normal meaning that is attributed to this term, because our senses, when they feel that something is pleasing, then we experience sukha. But this is also put in contrast with the experience of dukkha. So when we talk of sukha in this sense, it is connected with the idea of dukkha, because the moment something is not pleasurable, then we are no longer experiencing happiness or integral well-being at that stage. So there is another term, another meaning of this term, which is of kha, of the word kha, which means space. So sukha actually means excellent space, and dukkha means bad space. So what do we mean by excellent spaces, and where are these excellent spaces? So the moment you look at sukha as excellent spaces, you start recognizing then that life itself is nothing but a conglomeration of various dynamic spaces. There are personal spaces, there are public spaces, there are internal spaces, there are external spaces. Life can be viewed as nothing more but an exchange of multiple spaces. So what do we mean that? What do we mean by ensuring an excellent space in all these places? So just a quick discussion on excellence. So some thoughts that you can have there. What is excellence? So it can mean purity, perseverance to be the best, perfection, perseverance again, peace. If there's anybody else, if you'd like to, any word that you think that excellence represents, which has not been highlighted here, if anybody would like to add a term or two there. What would excellence mean? Excellence, anybody? Anything else that has not been given in here?
Maybe supreme.
Supreme, yes. And there is also an idea of a certain standard sometimes. When we talk of excellence, there is an outstanding, exactly, love, satisfaction comes from pushing oneself, absolutely, complete, wonderful, wonderful. And we also see that there is a standard against which we are talking, when we talk of excellence, there is an ideal that we tend to refer to. Okay, so is there an ideal like that in these spaces that we are interacting in? Question open. Let's move on. And some important questions. Which space should be excellent? Like I said, there is a personal space, there's an interpersonal space, there's an external space. What are the implications of having all these spaces, and can we ensure this excellence? And in this, what is the role of the senses? What is the role of the mind? Do we need to keep watch on it? Its sacredness. Okay. And what are the implications on each of this? So I'll just quickly take you through some of this. So when we talk of thinking of well-being, or we thinking of happiness, which space needs to be excellent for us? Which spaces need to be excellent, or which space needs to be excellence? Anybody?
I think personal space will be.
Personal space, yeah. So the personal space. So what you also realize is very largely you can divide the world into two kinds of spaces. There is an outside space and there is an inside space. Now, if the outside space has to be excellent, then is it really in our hand?
No.
Not really. To a certain extent. Let's not completely take away a responsibility from it, to a certain extent. But when we're talking of well-being in the context of external spaces contributing towards it, then we realize that it is not really, it's not fully in our control. But if we acknowledge that this excellence is a quality of the inner space, then to what extent is it in our hands? Then it becomes exclusively our responsibility. And this is a very important shift that happens from an Indic perspective of well-being, that our well-being is exclusively our responsibility. How we are managing our inner space is really up to every individual to determine. So what do we mean by inner spaces? So it's in this inner space that I talk about, what's the next? It's when I talk of inner spaces, let's do a space scan exercise. So very quickly. So I'll request all of you to close your eyes and take you through the different spaces that are spoken of in the Indian tradition, namely referring to the Pancha Kosha theory of ourselves, where we are a physical being, but we are not just a physical being, we have an emotional being. So the physical being is associated with the Annamaya Kosha, the physical being that is determined by the food we eat as well. And therefore, what is the nature of the food we eat that affects our physical well-being? What is the nature of the emotions we are having, the Pranamaya Kosha? And that's the life energy principle of our being. So if our emotions are sticky, then it affects the wellness of our entire of the entire body, in fact. And that's very interestingly, during the yoga festival, we had a friend, Carol Dalma, who talked about this fascia. She said that actually it's not our body is not composed of bones and muscles, and there is prana around it. She says that there is something like the fascia, this very nebulous kind of a substance that is floating, in which the rest of the bones and all are floating. And if that gets sticky because we are rigid in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our body movements, then we start feeling unwell. Then there is disease in us. So the pranic Shakti is very important. The pranic, the flow of the prana, which seems very similar to what the fascia does in the body from a biological perspective, is extremely important. So what is the state of our emotional or pranamaya kosha? What is the state of our mind, the manomaya kosha? And finally, the levels beyond the intuitive sheath, the Vijnanamaya kosha, and beyond to the Anandamaya kosha. So I'll do this exercise with you, and I'll just request you to do a quick space scan exercise. So close your eyes and just do a quick scan. So connect your awareness to your physical body, and just take one or two deep breaths and allow whatever tensions that you have there to relax. So take a few deep breaths and allow that to relax. So literally feel the body experiencing a certain wellness. Then shift your attention to your emotional being. And just observe what is the nature of the emotional being. Is it cluttered? Is it free? Is it in between? And just as an observer, try and, in a sense, blow some breath into it and allow it to open up, allow it to disengage from its entanglements rather. So allow it to just settle down and experience that well-being and wellness at your emotional level. So that abundance, a sense of abundance, go on to your mental level, your mind space. Is your mind space cluttered, apprehensive, many thoughts? If it's the case, just allow it to relax, to just empty out just for a few minutes. And visualizations are very powerful because they actually allow us to empty out. So just imagine that you're emptying out your mind. And then just take your identity to a step above yourself or deeper in yourself, wherever you're comfortable. So become an observer of the entire being. and try and just wash that space as if with a water. So the image of the Ganga, just imagine the waters of the Ganga washing your being and cleansing it and allowing as much of purity and freshness and abundance of being to fill your inner space. And then experience the whole of yourself connecting with the world around you, but with a great sense of peace. So while in today's world there's a lot of darkness because of the fears, because of the uncertainties, become a being of a radiating energy, of positive light, of this abundance. So allow your macrocosm to radiate positive light, energy, and well-being into the world around it. Become a conscious transmitter of that at all the levels of your being. And then come back to yourself. So with this sense of a complete fullness within and without, can come back to the space of our discussion. And we see that there is a thing of sukha at all levels. So at the level of the body, we have, because when you think of the inner space, just like the space of a room, if the inner space has to be well maintained, it is important that the structures are well preserved. So what is the structure of that inner space? It's our body. And what is the body comprise of? The food, health, environment, exercise, sleep. All these are very important contributors to ensuring that the structure is strong and well. Some important factors. So noble and virtuous persons prefer food that increases their lifespans, purifies the mind and intellect, keeps the body healthy and strong, promotes welfare and happiness, is juicy, oily and soft, does not become stale quickly, and is also pleasing to the eyes and the mind. Okay, so this is one description in the Ayurvedic text about what kind of food one should consume. Moving on to the emotional being, we see that things that nourish our emotional nourish us, that and also that we know we need to cultivate to nourish the world around us. So there are these positive relationships, self-esteem, goodwill for the self and for others, compassion, and I'm sure there are many others that we can add there. And so here we have this, which says that happy relations don't happen on their own. They're created every day with love, understanding, desire to support and be there for each other. Good things for happy spaces in the mind, good books, good interactions, exchanges with students, colleagues, being in nature, all these things that generate space. So the word well, getting back to the word well and seeing how beautifully it connects with sukha, this idea of the abundance. So wherever there is constriction, there will be sorrow and pain and disease. Wherever there is abundance and freedom and plenitude, that's where there will be well-being. And if one practices these things, then you don't have to look for happiness. Happiness and well-being will be side effects. So trying to cultivate these consciously will facilitate a natural experience of this integral well-being. And a mindset is very important because that's the backdrop or the background on which we are playing our external stories. So what's the dominant mindset? So how do we shift from more negative ones to positive ones that would lead to a better life? And factors for spiritual well-being, we know that that is also the source that nourishes us. And in the Indic perspective, what they always tell us is that our reality is not what we associate our projected being to be. So they talk of these two selves. There is the self with a small s, and there is a self with a big S. So the self with the small s is our projected self of who we think we are. And the big S is the one that we really know. I mean, it's when we are able to drop these projections and just allow ourselves to rest in our larger potential. So freedom, selflessness, generosity, gratitude, these are all qualities that are spontaneous of the manifestations of the larger self. And factors for spiritual sukha, and some conclusions quickly. How do you manage your inner and outer spaces? So when we were talking of the inner space as a room, we know that the inputs to the room are our senses. So if you're giving our senses to things that are negative, hurtful, harmful, all of that, we cannot expect suddenly that there will be good space inside of us. So what are we giving our senses out to? What are we giving the main door, the mind out to? Will play a very important role in determining what is happening. But so then how do you therefore plan your space? How do you design it? How do you execute those designs? And finally, how do you maintain those spaces? So how do we maintain your inner and outer home? Is it like that? Or does it resemble something like that? Okay. And how do we can we work towards having a more clutter-free home is the idea. And I know, I mean, there can be many dimensions that this is elitist, there can be these discourses, but that's not what is intended. So one has to understand that when images are being shown, these are symbolic of each one for their own comfort zone. So whatever that space might be, but can it be clutter-free? That's the important thing. How do we maintain our environment? Is this what we are doing and exposing ourselves to that? And what unfortunately happens if we are constantly exposing ourselves to this, then we are naturally going to be filled with a lot of muck inside and not even realize that it's affecting our inner self. Or are we going to look for something like this at a collective level as well? And therefore, can we work on these lines to help ourselves? And this is a very powerful definition in the Chandogya Upanishad of the term Sukha. Because when Narada is asked, Narada comes to Sanat Kumara, the young sage, and tells him, I know all the knowledges and all, but I'm not happy. I'm shochami, I'm still worried. Tell me the secret. So he says, Yo vai bhuma tat sukham. And the word bhuma is beautiful because it means expansive, it means plenitude, it means many things. And the beauty is that if you practice, and that's where my marketing of Sanskrit comes in, is if you just say Yo vai bhuma, you say bhuma and you start creating that space, that expansive space within yourselves. Okay, that's sukham. That is sukham. And how this is very quickly, I will just run through probably, but just the idea that there is an ideal always. And so an ideal is this room that I showed you, the clutter-free room. Can we replicate it in our lives? We know the ideals, but we are not able to implement it. So the right is when we're able to implement it. And what will be the consequence? The consequence will be the vast or the brihat. So when we know so how do we approximate integral well-being in our lives? Is to create our ideals for ourselves. Try to see how do we approximate it in execution. And then you don't have to try. The more we approximate it, the more spontaneously we will have sukha and well-being. And this is what is the idea of dharma. The example very classically I give is of the glove, where if you want to wear the right glove to do surgery, you need to know the contours of the hand, which is satya. You need to wear the glove that will fit it exactly, which is ritam. And ritam bhara, that's the highest intelligence that is talked about in the Yoga Sutras. That intelligence that knows the right thing to do at the right moment. So it's a brilliant name actually. And so how can we know the right? So when you do that, then your hand is held in the best way possible. And that is the idea of dharma. So dharma implies the knowledge of the ideal and the practice of the ideal. And that's why the Indic civilization gave a premium value to dharma. It was not about looking for the good life or the right, the best life and all. It was looking for how do you lead a dharmic life. Because if we can understand the ideals and do them in every sphere of life, then sukha will be unavoidable, will be absolutely the case. Okay, and that then leads to swasthya. In ourselves, when those alignments happen, then swasthya or good health will follow when we are established in the greater self of ourselves. Swastha, established in the self. And I'm closing. So it says the mind is like water. When it's turbulent, it's difficult to see. When it's calm, everything becomes clear. So with these words again, finally, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, we will end with that as a chant. Thank you very much.